Maybe we'll cut that bit out. Welcome to my workshop. My name's Gary Rizzolo. I bought some magazines recently and I'd just like to show you that as I was flicking through I came across this full page ad on the back page of this magazine. Fantastic. Who is that man? Demonstrating Luban Planes, and that's what we're going to look at today. Let's have a look at a couple of Luban Planes and also let's see how they compare with a Stanley plane. Now, Stanley have been the go-to plane for many, many years. And in fact, I have bought Stanley planes myself. I have this one that I probably bought in about 1976. And this little one that I probably got in about 1980 something, 82 or 83. So I have used Stanley planes, but folks, I've been converted. And I've been converted by the Luban plane. So what we're going to do is have a look at the Stanley plane, the go-to plane, compared to the Luban plane, which is one of my favourite planes, and just see how much each plane gives you value for money. Now, Luban Planes, of course, make planes that are basically modelled on the Stanley planes. I mean, Stanley planes have been around for many, many, many years, and they have developed beautiful models of planes over that time. But it seems to me that Stanley really need to pull up their socks, because what you get for the money you spend is probably not half as good as what you might get for the money you spend somewhere else on another brand. Here we have a smoothing plane from Stanley, and inside you have a smoothing plane which is, you know, to the first glance, not too bad. It's got everything you need. But the handles are made of plastic. The blade is very, very thin, like 1.5 millimeters. The sole of the plane is quite coarse. The linishing marks are very evident on the sole of this plane. Linishing is the process that the factory uses to dress or level the sole of the plane, in fact, to remove all the casting marks. And linishing is like a big belt sander, basically, and they must hold the plane on there just to dress it off and then sell it to you. Now, on this one, the linishing marks are very deep. The problem with those deep linishing marks is that the plane, or the sole of the plane, is not level. So you need to do a lot of work to dress it down to get it smooth. So this old plane was very coarsely linished. The newer Stanley seems to be a lot better. The linishing marks are still evident, but it's a lot finer. On the Luban plane, however, the sole of the plane is smooth and flat already. It's been dressed, it's ready to use. Let me put my glasses on. Let's look more closely at the two smoothing planes, the Stanley No. 4 and its equivalent Luban plane. I just happen to have a straight edge here. Let's have a look at the sole of these planes, and just holding it up in the light, this one is reading slightly hollow. This one, and I've got the blades adjusted down out of the way, by the way, so the straight edge is reading dead flat. That's perfect. There's a slight hint of a slight uphill bit there, but it's hardly anything compared to this one. This one is incredibly hollow, like big big shaft of light shining through this whole centre section. So this would take a fair bit of work to get dressed out level to start planing. So the other thing is that just the look of the two planes, this one looks like it's a workhorse. This one looks a little bit, there's an obvious sign of lack of quality, I'm afraid to say. It just has this is a bit crooked, and when I just rub my fingers around the mouth of the plane, this is actually incredibly rough, and you would need to take to this with a file to smooth it out. It is also not straight. I can see it with my eye that it's actually quite wavy, whereas this one is perfectly straight and it feels good. It's not rough, it's ready for action. Okay, so what we'll do next is look at the functionality of the two planes. The Stanley plane, if I pick that up, it actually feels quite comfortable. It's quite light, and you know, it'd be okay to use because it does feel quite light and quite nice. If I pick up the Luban plane, it's also very comfortable. The handles feel nice. It's a little bit heavier. It feels solid. Inside the plane, the blade mechanism. First of all, let me look at the Stanley. The first thing we see is the lever cap. Now this lever cap, I have to say, even compared to my old Stanley, the lever cap is not as well made. The lever itself is quite loose, and it's actually been attached at an angle, a funny angle, so the quality of this is not good. Let's compare it to the old Stanley lever cap from the plane that I would have bought in the 70s. You can clearly see there's quite a difference. Beautifully machined. The actual lever will hold its position, and that's because it has a little spring plate on the back that locks it into its various positions. The new Stanley, in comparison, just flops around, and that's because it doesn't have the spring plate at the back, so there's nothing to lock it in position or to help it lock into position. The actual finish, surface finish, is incredibly different. There's a bit of pride gone into this one. There doesn't seem to be much pride gone into this one. If we lift out the blade and the chip breaker, then what we find is, look, I was taught that the lever cap is a handy device for undoing the screw. This lever cap won't even fit into the screw slot. So I'm going to have to use a screwdriver. Now the blade of the Stanley looks quite nice, but it's a very thin blade. It seems to be made of good steel. It's quite nicely machined. It's obviously been ground, surface ground in some way. You can see the grinding marks on there. Also, the edge of the plane blade has been ground very nicely. The next thing I would look at with this plane is the frog, and I'm sighting down the frog to see where it's situated compared to the mouth, and it actually doesn't look too bad, although it looks a bit crooked. And I would probably try and adjust it, but it may not have adjustment. But for most purposes, as it is, it will work. So let's pop the blade on so we can sit the blade into its lateral adjustment lever, and that kind of works. And then if I put the lever cap back on and lock it in, now I should be able to adjust the blade out and Oh, the knob is very hard, and I have got it free. It is moving, so that's a good thing. And the blade is coming forward a little bit at a time. So here we go. Now I'm looking down the sole of the plane and I'm seeing the blade, and it is just sitting there as a nice little fine black hairline across the sole. So we have this plane kind of adjusted, ready to use. Look where the lateral adjustment lever is in order to get the blade straight and ready for action. So that was a very difficult piece of adjustment to try and get the blade set up ready to cut. It should be a lot smoother. It should be a lot easier to set up. So this was quite hard, quite difficult to do. Now we did spot that the frog was a little bit out of adjustment, and a lot of these issues can be corrected. But if you've just bought your first plane and it's a Stanley number 4 and you're trying to use it, you will be struggling, because you know it takes a bit of experience with planes to realise, oh yeah, the frog's out of adjustment, I can correct that. I can correct the angle of the blade slightly to make it sit better in the plane itself, and you've got to know how to do all that. So when we used this Stanley plane, we did notice that the lateral adjustment lever was way off to the side, and the cure for that is to adjust the frog. On this plane, the frog is held by 2 screws, and the adjustment is done by eye. There's no, the 2 screws just lock it into place on the bottom of the plane, and so you would have to loosen those screws and then just sight down the frog and align it to the mouth by eye, and then lock it down with the 2 screws. So that's the mechanism or the adjustment by which you would sort out that plane so that the lateral adjustment is a bit more even and in the center. This is a very coarse adjustment. It feels like it's got paint underneath. So in essence, one should completely remove the frog and clean all the paint surfaces so that the frog is mating on machined surfaces. So as you can see, I actually got the Stanley to plane a piece of wood. It was a fairly soft piece of wood, a bit of mahogany. It took a lot of setting up and mucking around to get it to that point, and to me it just doesn't look good. It doesn't feel good, it doesn't plane well. However, we are talking about straight out of the box, just a quick clean setup and try and get it to plane. So we haven't done heaps of work to this, and the result speaks for itself. This plane would require many hours of fine tuning to get it to work well. The Luban plane, if we start to disassemble this, we see that the lever cap is a beautifully made piece, and it functions very nicely, as we pointed out previously. The blade pops out, and we have the blade locking screw, which we can just undo, slide it around, pull it apart. The blade on the Luban plane is beautifully machined. It's very thick, it's 3mm, so it's a nice solid plain blade, which when you come to sharpen it will be a lot easier to work with and deal with than the thin blade that comes from over the other side. The chip breaker is also a solid piece of 3mm steel, but it has this extra little lip, which is the functionality of which is breaking the chips, and we can see very clearly when I adjust this up that it is firmly touching the blade, and the meeting point is very smooth, so the chips will ride off there very nicely. We can then drop the blade into the frog. The frog looks very good. Everything's sitting very nicely here. You pop the lever cap back on and look down the sole and adjust the blade. Now the adjusting knob here is very easy to use compared to the other plane. So I've got it reasonably adjusted now. The mechanism is so much smoother and nicer to use. It feels good, it looks good. It feels ready for action. Let's try it. So to sum up, we've taken two planes, a Stanley and a Luban. They are fresh out of the packaging. We haven't done anything except a disassemble and a reassemble. So we've just tried out how they function from the package. Some people might be expecting that when they purchase the plane it's ready to use and that they should not have to do anything to it. We're just doing a shootout. How do they operate without even sharpening the blades? And I'm sorry, I have to say that the Luban plane just wins hands down. The quality of the Luban is exceptional. The Stanley plane does not compare in quality to the Luban, and you can see that for yourself. If you like this video, don't forget to like and subscribe. For more information, click on the links below. I'm Gary Rizzolo from Rizzolo Guitars. Thank you very much for watching.